Hi, I'm Tony, and I'm one half of Team Dapper Space Bunnies. Today I want to be going over some of the changes that we've made to our game Crabpocalypse this semester. Now, this semester we focused mostly on content generation and implementing our story, whereas last semester we were doing mechanics. That said, there were a couple new mechanics we added this semester, namely our shop, where the player can spend any gold they've gotten from battles to buy items to help them out during the game, like so, and the skill tree, where the player can get skill points from leveling up and put them into one of 3 skill trees. You can get more information about these skill trees by mousing over them, but some of the information is still hidden from the player, so that way it adds some replay value. The player can, on one playthrough, focus on one skill tree, and then on the next one they can focus on the next, or split it up between all of them, so on and so forth. As for actual levels this semester, we've created 12 new levels, 9 regular, and 3 boss levels. I'm just going to be showing a little bit of each level, just to sort of gloss over some of the cool things that we added. Namely, in the beach section of levels, there we've added a second plane that the player can go back and forth between, because we figured this is a 3D game, so why not use our extra plane. Now I'm just going to skip ahead to the boss of these levels real quick, but in the meantime, I just want to address that most of the things that we are skipping over here will appear in later levels, more specifically the final stretch. Other than that, there are underground segments, cannons that shoot the player, but again, you'll see it all later. Now, moving on to our first new boss, this is Crabton Claudius. So you might have seen that cannon fire raining down on the player. He's the one who's been shooting it at him, because he's here to sort of sabotage Max's operation. This boss fight, its main deal is that the Crabton here has a cannon that, if it's still alive, he can use it to shoot the player off of his ship. Then the player will have to play a sort of mini-game to get back on. Let's see if we can get him to do it. Like so. So now we're back on the beach, he's back on his ship, and he is shooting cannon fire on us from afar, so you've kind of got to wait for him to come within sight of the cannons and launch yourself back at him. But meanwhile he's raining cannon fire, so you can't really just stand by the cannon at all times. So here we go. And wow, I completely messed up the timing on that, so if you miss the ship, you just take some damage and get back into the fight. There is a good bit more to this boss fight, like him being able to call for help once the cannon is dead, him eating health items to get his health back, and him getting annoyed at you if you keep interrupting his healing, but you'll just have to see that if you play the game for yourself. So let's just try to see if he'll do anything. No, it doesn't look like it, so let's just move on. Skip by some more story here. He drowns himself to stop himself from divulging secrets to the player. And so I skipped it earlier at the start, but each of our new sections has a story cutscene similar to what we showed off last semester that sort of details where the story is progressing. Now you'll see we are on the roof of the Crab Shack, which is where the third set of levels takes place. On the roof here, I skipped past some dialogue, but there are some crab enemies holding passwords. So if we defeat them real quick, just an overdrive to make things faster, we can grab their password. So if we go to the exit of the roof, there will be a terminal we can interact with. Also these grates that act sort of like teleporters that Max is going through. And there you'll see. We have gotten one of the 4 pieces of the password. I'm sure you can guess what that spells, but we don't really have time to get all of them, so let's move on. Now that we're on the interior, you'll see that we have these grabby claws that pick up the player and try to drag them over into a giant pit of fry oil that's on the inside. If we move around, you'll see that the stairs have been boarded up, so Max will have to find a new way to get down. Now the player can use these grates and moving back and forth to try to avoid the claws, or they can mash out of them, like those arrows suggested. And so you saw that weight on the ground there. That weight is kind of how Max progresses to the next level, so if we walk over to probably one of the easier ones to get, stand on top of it and wait for the claw to come by again, if we just give it a second, we can move out of the way, and then the claw will pick up the weight instead. It will drop the weight into the oil pit, and you'll see that the floor is kind of damaged there. Do that with all 4 weights, and the floor breaks and you can progress. Now the next level is sort of like quiz questions to test if the player's been paying attention to the story up until now. So the player can hop on these panels. If they hit the right one, they'll progress. If not, they will take some damage. There's some more stuff to that level, like oil pits the player can traverse through to find secrets and so forth, but we'll just skip over that for now. And instead focus on our next boss fight. This is Crustache Moustache. He is sort of the brains behind the crab operation. And so his idea is that he and his intern Jimmy will attack the player. Now, Jimmy's not exactly the strongest guy around, as you will see in a second. In fact, he spends most of his time goofing off, eating healing items, or flailing meekly at the player. What you saw there is Crustache Moustache's quiz attack. So he will tell the player to perform some specific kind of action. If the player performs that action before he gets to his act phase, he will congratulate the player and nothing will happen. Now, if the player chooses not to do said action, like for example if the player really needs to guard something, but he's telling the player to attack instead, then he will punish the player. Let's see if we can just get him to do that. So the main idea behind this fight, aside from that, is that whereas in other fights you benefit from taking down the boss's helper, this fight you actually want to keep him alive because one of his attacks actually throws Jimmy at the player. And they both take damage, which is just not what you want to happen. Let's go ahead and do the wrong action there. And we'll see what happens if we get the incorrect quiz response. So he drops us into the oil pit. We fall in, while we're in we're constantly taking damage, so the player has to sort of navigate their way through. And this is randomly generated every time. You can also put up a barrier to protect yourself. I probably should have done that earlier, but you use the grate, you're back up, you can get back into the fight. Back to what I was saying a second ago, Jimmy will take damage from some of Crustache Moustache's attacks, and if he dies, Crustache Moustache gets enraged and a lot stronger, but you'll have to see that for yourself later. Oh, so small bug there. Let's just go ahead and end this fight again really quick. Perfect, and let's not mash the space button too fast this time. Great, so now we are in our final stretch of levels, and this is where the player stops really being introduced to new traps and enemies, and really just more sees combinations of existing traps and enemies that did not appear in earlier levels. Let me just get some points in there real quick. And moving on, in this first segment you'll see a combination of claws and the lasers from last semester. So there are these pits in the ground that the player can get in to avoid the gunfire, but the claw will also try to pick them out of these pits and back within range of the guns. So let's avoid that real quick and keep moving forward. Now earlier in the beach levels there were these batteries that could be destroyed by the cannon fire because Max himself was not strong enough to actually break them. And in order to progress to the next level, we need to open doors by, you guessed it, breaking batteries. Since there was no cannon fire, Max instead has to make do with these guns. So let's just jump down here real quick. And Max stands by here, lets the gun shoot the batteries, it breaks it, and now some doors opened up so we can keep progressing through the game. But we'll just skip over the rest of this. And here we see the combination of oil pits, conveyor belts, and the cannon fire is back from the beach levels. If we jump up here with our power jump real quick, then you'll see that there's a battery up there, just got destroyed, and then that opens some more doors. You'll also see some Instead of conveyor belts, some things with the falling block traps from earlier, which we will get to right here. So the player could just run past this and avoid the cannon fire, or if they ride one of these blocks up, they can get to a secret pathway with power jumps. And they'll find more ways to get through the level there. Anyway, moving on. So in our last normal level, if you ever played Pokemon Fire Red, then you remember the Team Rocket hideout, where it's basically just a maze of teleporters. It's kind of like that. So you have cannons that will launch you all across the level, and vents you can walk through to get you different parts. It's kind of a maze to get to the final exit. I don't remember how to do that right now, so let's just go ahead and skip right to it. So in our final boss level, the player encounters an old enemy from last semester, that of course being not Crab's Zero, but Shovel Crab, the one responsible for digging the tunnel under the factory. So Shovel Crab is the savior of the crabs. The fight starts, you'll see he's way too strong for the player. He has a really big dramatic attack that he tries to take the player out in one hit, but he messes it up. Anyway, the true final boss is Mr. Crabraham Linkrab here, who has been masquerading as Shopkeep for the whole game. And so as such, we wanted his boss fight to sort of be themed around items. So at the start, he will steal all the players' items, give them some money in return, and you'll see how much money the boss has right under his health there. Now, if he ever runs out of money, he will enter an enraged state, so you probably don't want to let that happen. But also, you can keep buying items from him to get their effects, but it'll give him some money, and he can use that money to buy items from his own store and use them against the player. You saw that he just had an attack that knocks the player out into the platforming segment, knocks it to the other side of the room, the floor collapses, and there's just these oil geysers that come up in a semi-random fashion, but you get this big period of bubbles beforehand so the player knows to get out of the way. And he's also shooting these explosives at you, so the player has to sort of navigate across them while also avoiding these oil pillars. And we'll see if we can just get back to him real quick. The player can also try to bypass sections of this using their barrier that I used for a second earlier. Air dashes, power jumps, overdrive, all that stuff. But in doing so, you'll be using up more of your drive, which to replenish means giving the boss more of your money. Some other things that he can do during the boss fight are summon helpers that can range from the crowded enemy, which is pretty weak, but it's fast and it can interrupt the player, as well as a healer, the Holy Crab, and also the Crab Witch, which is sort of the offensive helper and does a lot of damage. Let's just go ahead and skip through this real quick. And you'll see just how much drive that you'll be losing if you try to use the barrier and overdrive to skip past that. And so then you have to give Linkrab the highest valued item back and gives him a ton of money. So I do want to see if he will buy an item from his own shop. Doesn't seem to be the case that he wants to do that yet. Let's just let it go for another few turns and see if he will. He keeps trying to call for help, which, if he already has an ally, he'll just end up adjusting his hat instead. He can also perform a slightly stronger attack than normal. He's got a new helper. That's the Holy Crab I was talking about, who can cast healing spells. Hopefully he'll do an item. Let's give him... There you go. So you saw, it went by kind of fast there, but he just bought a speed item from the shop. But that's the basic idea of that boss fight. For our final story cutscene, we see another familiar face returning, being Crab's Zero from last semester, after the player gave him the revelation that he does not need to be a crab to be happy, he comes back to save the player in the final scene, installs him, and blows up. So that's our game. It's still a little rough around the edges, but we're looking forward to continue working on it over the summer after graduation. It's for an eventual release. Thanks for watching.